Data East. Back before the internet and video game magazines, it was much more of a challenge to decide where to spend our hard-earned cash. Most of the time it came down to luck, unless a recognizable franchise or publisher was plastered on the game. Activision on Atari 2600 carts, Konami or Capcom for the NES, and Data East never ceased to deliver quality arcade machines. Burger Time, Lock and Chase, BOOGIE Wings, heaps of classics made available to the public since the late 70s, but I'm not that old, so my appreciation for the company didn't begin until the tail end of the 80s. You might laugh, but Side Pocket was my obsession as a kid. When it came to the NES the following year, 1987, I rented it all the time before nabbing a copy of my own on the cheap from a friend. Heavy Barrel, the best Ikari Warriors copycat game ever produced, complete with 8-way rotary joysticks, Karnov, and all of the Data East titles he appeared in, the real Ghostbusters, an often overlooked shooter that didn't do the series dirty like those other licensed titles. At this point, I'm referring to a curated list online and simply tossing out names of games that I remember fondly from the arcades. There are too many to mention, we won't even get into the home ports. More often than not, they paled in comparison to their big boxy cabinet brethren, but it was still cool to be able to play Bad Dudes at home, watered down and all. Alright, so just a few more. RoboCop, Joe and Mac, Desert Assault, Sly Spy, Captain America, and the Avengers. When the MAME emulator became a thing, I immediately downloaded as many Data East ROMs I could get my thieving, double-clicking fingers on, and this was my introduction to BOOGIE Wings, a game I've wanted to cover since I first started this failure of a channel. This is BOOGIE Wings, a 1992 arcade exclusive developed and published by this quality company that is loosely set during the First World War. Known as the Great Ragtime Show in Japan, this horizontal shooter is one of the most charmingly unique games I've ever experienced. I mean, just look at this thing, it's nuts! Beautiful, detailed sprites, colorful scrolling backgrounds, rotation effects, poo signs, ghoulish monsters, swinging balls, pop culture icons, holiday cheer. It's bananas. The arcade advertisements at the time described your character as a young inventor with an affinity for flying, who was on the trail of an era-appropriate mustache-twirling villain. It's clear that this thin plot was heavily inspired by old-timey serials, as this top-hat-wearing antagonist appears sporadically throughout the half a dozen stages to flip his cape and egg you on. There are 2 endings with a secret level that can be accessed if a certain decision is made. After the first area, it's possible to choose from 5 others, which offers up a bit of variety. All of the missions are distinct, each hosting their own variety of traps, gimmicks, and challenges. They're a bit lengthy, but with so much going on, the action is never given the chance to get repetitive, dull, or predictable. Sometimes you'll be forced out of your Red Baron-inspired plane to battle it out within large, densely packed steampunk fortresses. These leviathans are a real treat, as they house tons of minuscule minions with charming little animations. I could spend an entire video poring over all of these cartoony details, but I'd still fail to cover everything. Whenever I load BOOGIE Wings up, I notice something new. It's a game that is as fun to play as it is to watch. Occasionally there's some slowdown, but not as much as you'd think, and it never interferes with the action. Of course, I'm also emulating this, so that could be a factor. It's clear that the audio hasn't been perfectly replicated here, but the only legal alternative I know of is the extremely pricey At Games Legends arcade machine, and who has that kind of money to dump on an emulation box? It's cool and all, but I'd rather just build my own. Normally I'd say that it feels pretty fine to play arcade games with a modern controller, but when it comes to BOOGIE Wings, I'd definitely recommend a stick. The flying is tight either way, but what most of you have probably noticed, and what I've not mentioned until now, is this strange rotating hook dangling from the plane. This is the game's main gimmick, or hook if you prefer puns, as it can be used to grab various items throughout the stages. It's controllable with the directional inputs and can be swung around as you guide your craft. The momentum and physics take a while to get used to, and even after all of these years, I'm hardly a master. I don't even know if it's possible to completely reliably become a pro at swinging it, as a certain amount of randomness seems to be involved, but it kinda adds to the fun. Either way, this skyhook is a terrific inclusion, as it can be used to eliminate smaller foes or pick up and drop mines on bigger bigger bads. Plus, as I said, it's just a blast to use, though it could be a bit tough to rotate a controller's analog stick or directional pad. That's why I prefer a joystick. It allows a more seamless circular range of motion. The hook is extremely versatile that goes beyond a mere gimmick. Mastering it adds a strategic element to the game, as it can be used as a wrecking ball with the proper pieces of landscape attached, or a means of flinging around the dozens of tiny peons that litter the screen. There's a weight to the larger objects that can be towed, but nothing interferes with the speed of the plane itself. The controls are tight all around. I could sit here and tell you what each button does, but I think we'd both prefer watching this handy dandy ragtime tutorial. Let's do it together.
We're on a mission from God.
When it comes to feel, Boogie Wings has a bit of a metal slug thing going on. There's a floaty nature to the mechanics, especially when you've lost one of the rides. It's remarkable how good everything feels. Even as the little guy on screen, it's easy to tell what's going on. Despite the diminutive size of the character sprite, he's easy to track, and there's a generous invincibility period when transitioning from a vehicle after taking damage. Elephants, pogo sticks, stylized steampunk mech suits, tanks, fire engines. This great war-inspired world is truly your oyster, and only marginally less realistic than the Battlefield game inspired by the era. There's really nothing more exciting than hearing "Yahoo!" from our unflappable little man as he mounts a horse, or anything for that matter. Even with all of these vehicles available, the biplane is still my weapon of choice. Power-ups increase its speed and projectiles. By tapping fire quickly, it also unleashes a strong lightning blast to contend with all of the chaos on screen, but it's on a timer and can overheat if used carelessly. Boogie Wings might look like a mess, but it's quite fair. Novice players will probably have to waste a quarter or two as they familiarize themselves with the controls, but the first stage is an excellent training course that builds gradually. It's far from easy, but definitely not after your money in the same way a lot of its arcade contemporaries were at the time. You only lose a life when struck down as the tiny dude, and there are so many rides to commandeer for extra defense. This makes Boogie Wings a fun, fair, balanced experience. One where you'll be able to live long enough to soak in its wonderfully inspired art style. From Frankenstein's monster, the Blues Brothers, Santa Claus, and puppies. There's always something exciting going on. The design is top-notch, and it's incredible how even the tiniest of sprites pop off the screen. Have I praised these visuals enough? Even the relatively basic cutscenes and score tallies are entertaining to watch. Tatsuya Kiuchi, Tomoyoshi Sato, and Mihoko Ando composed the soundtrack, and it's as inspired as the animations, with period-appropriate pieces of music folded into more traditional video game arrangements. Unfortunately, the audio is where this emulated version suffers the most, but the isolated score is available online for those interested in a cleaner transfer. There are as many audio Easter eggs as there are visual ones, with entertaining voice samples thrown into the mix occasionally. My favorite themes are the ones that play out during the haunted house sequence in the amusement park level, and the tiny nod to the band Kiss as the Detroit Rock City stage begins. Some areas are better than others, and a few tunes feel less inspired, but overall, the audio matches up to the insanity on screen exceptionally well. The Christmas-themed streets while battling a menacing Santa is jaw-droppingly gorgeous, and seeing our nefarious little friend pound out keys as he emerges from the ground in a Phantom of the Opera manner is simply fantastic. The innards of this giant zeppelin is still a highlight for me after dozens of playthroughs, and the time machine set piece would make H.G. Wells proud. Every bit of creative enthusiasm is right there on the screen. It's clear that these developers had a blast adding all of these ingredients to the pot, and I love every minute of it. There's a Terry Gilliam Monty Python silliness to the drawings. If this were a reaction video, my face would have a giant smile on it the entire time, but I've yet to sink that low for more views, likes, and subscriptions to ever consider doing one of those lazy contrived things. Very few games make me as happy as Boogie Wings. Truthfully, I often catch myself giggling with my mouth agape, nearly drooling over its splendor. The Japanese and English versions are identical aside from the obvious language differences. It's just a shame that this hilariously fun arcade game never saw an affordable home port, because if it ever does, it would be worth up to $40 in my opinion. I'd gladly pay that. There's nothing quite like Boogie Wings, have I said that enough? It's perfect proof that Data East were a force to be reckoned with back in the day when it came to inventive arcade games. It's clearly one of my favorites of all time that everyone should experience, emulation hiccups and all. There's no better way to spend the holidays than to run and fly around as a nearly indestructible little sprite, taking on a less than jolly Kris Kringle as stray dogs happily yap at your ankles for treats. What a way to lift even the lowest of moods. This is Boogie Wings. Next time on this channel, another fan-made video game based off of my personal favorite title of 2022. So stay tuned and happy holidays.
It's 106 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.